What's going on, everybody? We are back. In case you missed it, my name is Cody Ziering. I'm one of the managing partners here at CannaBIZ Collects, and I'm happy to bring to you our third installment of our informational webinar series. Today, our subject is collections and relationships in the cannabis industry. So I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about a more informal situation that perhaps everyone can relate to. Let's say that you and a friend go out to dinner, and you guys obviously agree to split it, no sweat, but hey, your friend didn't have cash, maybe they forgot their wallet in the car, so you offer to pay. Happens all the time. I know that. My partner Brett and I do that constantly. However, a couple days go by, and your friend hasn't paid you back. They haven't sent you a Venmo, a PayPal, Zelle, any number of ways to transfer money. And what do? It's your money. It's rightfully yours. You paid for it. You guys agreed that you guys would split the check, so they owe money, but they're your friend. How do you go about getting that money back while still maintaining that friendship? You don't want to be aggressive, and you don't want to be mean and say, hey, you owe me this money. No. You want to approach it calmly and, kind of state your points. Just really all you care about is getting paid back and making sure that you guys remain friends throughout this whole process. So that's essentially what we're going to be talking about today, but in a more strict business sense, especially a business sense throughout the cannabis industry. So if you see me look over to the side, that's because I'm also running the broadcast here. So without any further ado, let's get into the webinar. So like I mentioned, we are talking about collections and relationships within the industry. So first step is always to make sure that you set proper expectations. Always setting expectations before anything ever becomes contractually obligated. That way, you and your client kind of have an entire understanding of what's going to happen, what the potential repercussions are if either one of you misstep your contract and it end up, voiding it or breaching the contract. Most importantly, right, in order to protect yourself as a business that's extending credit, meaning you guys are essentially becoming a lender, you got to make sure that there are penalties. So that way there's some repercussions that you guys can have if someone ends up defaulting. A great way that we love to do this is just to, you have some type of interest fees, usually no more than 1.5% per month, but still some type of additional monetary penalties, so that way your clients are incentivized to pay you on time. Otherwise, they know that perhaps their bill is going to grow. There's a very interesting equation, kind of a psychology equation that we like to talk about, and that's disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So as long as you're setting expectations and those match reality, you're not going to see any disappointment. But if you or your client have expectations above what actually happened, then there's going to be disappointment. So let me give you some examples that we've seen in the industry directly. Some of our clients have come to us with an interest, with collection, attorney fees to be added on top of their debtors' outstanding bills. And this increases the bills substantially. When we went to go collect, when CannaBIZ Collects went to go collect on our client's behalf, the debtor disputed the charges just because they didn't remember seeing or reading in the contract that there were additional penalties. So always make sure that they understand what's going on, what they're owed, etc. It's even worth taking your credit agreements, your policies, all that stuff to a business attorney to make sure that everything is fair, that the penalties are reasonable, and all the expectations are set properly. Which leads me to our next point. Something that should always happen whenever extending credit, and that's contracts, and you guessed it, contracts again. You always have to have a contract, and all of those expectations we talked about in the previous slide should be laid out in the contract. Do not be afraid to lay out how you do business to your customer, and make sure that you reach an agreement before you guys sign anything. Another really good strategy is to actually even have a little initial box next to some very important sections, like any interest clauses or additional monetary penalties that they may pay for breaching or paying their contract late, just so that way there is no confusion whatsoever and you've set their expectations correctly. If possible, you should also have a personal guarantee signed to protect yourself if that customer or that business goes out of business. If a business does file for Chapter 7 or Chapter 11, there's often very little or no recourse that you guys can actually use to recoup your debts. So with a personal guarantee, which also gets stipulated in a contract, perhaps even a separate contract, you still have an ability to go out and collect from someone personally. It's usually best to have an owner, especially someone with a no credit history, or the business has no credit history, to have their owner on the hook as well. So an example I'd like to give about the industry, we're in a very kind, very giving and caring industry. So a lot of the time, a lot of companies will actually just do things on handshakes. Hey, my friend works over there. You know what? I need 10 pounds of flour. Send it my way. And that's basically it. This can lead to improper expectations. Maybe you bought that flour knowing that it was 20% THC when instead it actually was like 11.5. And that's an issue. You've agreed to something, but it hasn't been laid out. So there's going to come issues with that. So on that point, and on to the next step, second most important is that you have to do your homework on who you're extending credit to. What that means is do some initial digging. You should always have a credit check done on the owner or the business, preferably both. As a matter of fact, CannaBIZ has a new service where we actually offer proprietary credit checks on cannabis businesses. This hasn't been done before, and we have a really awesome proprietary software, algorithm, and a team of specialists to help go through that. So we'll take any questions about that towards the end of the show when we have our question and answer section. But most importantly, you got to use your gut. You never extend credit to a business that you even have an inkling of a chance of them not paying you back, right? And if they do, then you need to make sure that you have every single I dotted and every single T crossed, because if they end up blowing you off or going out of business, you're not going to get paid back and you're going to lose all of that money. It's a very difficult way to stay in business when you do that consistently. And more importantly, it'll lead to a collection issue, right? So avoid those. Doing a credit investigation, including credit checks on the owners, some of the small young cannabis companies, to add just another layer of protection. An example, we know many companies that may not have a full-blown credit score reports for their customers, but at least work with them over time to ensure credibility. Have they ever been late on a payment? Do they have any references? Do some investigation. The more information that you have before extending credit and before signing any contracts with them, the better off that you're going to be. Crawl before you walk. Start with net 7 terms, net 5 terms before you extend to 15, 30, 60, 90, whatever it is. 60 and 90, by the way, are very long. So typically if you can avoid it, don't offer those. But still, crawl before you walk and then walk before you run. Now, here's kind of the next section, right? So we've already done the initial part. You do your homework, you set your expectations, and that's one of the really cornerstones of keeping a client relationship strong. The next step is what happens if they end up going delinquent and they don't pay you back and they end up becoming a debtor. Well, let's talk about a little bit what's going through their brain and what you need to do, what you need to know when approaching them. So when a client becomes a debtor, there's 4 likely scenarios. Number 1, and these are all like, what are they thinking and why are they thinking that way? So number 1 is that they're either ambiguous or not affected. Most likely they probably forgot to pay you the invoice. The mail came in, an assistant took it, put it in the wrong place, and they just simply forgot. When that happens, just be very upfront. Be like, hey, we sent an invoice, give a number, always be detailed as possible. Usually they just they forget to getting around to return your call. These typically don't need to get sent to collections, and you guys usually can do them on your own. If they stop returning your calls, then perhaps one of these next 3 situations will come into play. And number 2 is that maybe they're embarrassed. I personally hate owing anybody money. It kind of stinks if you owe somebody money and they call you and say, hey, you owe me this. It's a little embarrassing. If we go back to the very first situation about 2 friends going out to dinner, no one ever likes to make that call, and no one ever likes to get that call. I hate getting those calls, and I do everything that I can to make sure that I don't have any debt, any outstanding debt. If my buddy says, hey, I got dinner, I'll make sure I Venmo him as soon as I get the opportunity. So, an embarrassed debtor, they just usually forgot to pay, now they're late. Again, not the most difficult of collections. The next 3 of 4 is that they're nervous. They don't have any money to pay and they're nervous of the consequences. And then number 4, this is when disputes come into play, and perhaps also part of the setting expectations properly, is that they're either upset or angry and that they are disputing the charge or perhaps the product that they received. So on to the next step. Now that you understand their psychology a little bit more, let's talk about how you go about approaching them. So everything that you should do should always be to work to understand their perspectives. If they're simply running from their obligation to pay and you have spent a significant amount of time chasing, you need to give them that last chance to pay before escalating. Who's going to be approached them? Who's going to be approaching your debtor? It better not be your salespeople if it's obvious the customer is not cooperating. So let's go back through those 4 scenarios again. If they're ambiguous or not affected, all you have to do is just get in touch with them, make sure that you actually make contact and say, hey, you have an outstanding balance, let's get it paid. Can I take a credit card? Can I expect a check in the mail? Get some kind of verbal confirmation. The next scenario, if they're embarrassed, usually offering to waive the additional fees or pay minimized fees if they clear the balance by an end of a period, maybe that's a week, a month, a quarter, whatever it is, usually results in the balance being paid and them staying happy. If your client is nervous, offer them different solutions so that they can make efforts to pay you back without actually ruining their business. Typically that means making some type of payment plan, but on any payment plan you also want to make sure that you include something called a default judgment. Default judgment is something, it's a legal document where if one of the parties breaches their contract or defaults on the contract, penalties are automatically applied to the court. Basically, it's like going through the lawsuit, but they've already agreed that they've lost it. So very useful, very helpful. Still not always the easiest to collect, but at least it gives you legal repercussion automatically, which is crucial. This typically needs a new additional contract whenever you do that. Then the fourth part is your upset or your angry client. And the best way to do that is to offer solutions to make both sides happy. Perhaps a product exchange or a partial refund on that invoice usually makes the most sense. It allows them to get new product, keep them happy, keep their shops open and running. So let's go through an example. Try not to have your salespeople collect on outstanding monies. If they do, they're spending their time to try and collect old money as opposed to going out and gathering new sales. More importantly, they're the face of your company and they're the representative that your business's client knows. So if they're the ones kind of being the angry big dog saying, hey, you owe us money, it's going to put some stress on that relationship and it should be avoided. 2 ways to get around this. You can have some type of credit manager or receivables manager that can go and make these calls. Or 2, you hire a firm like CannaBIZ collects, of course, and we could go after and start trying to collect outstanding AR for you. Now, I know that we've kind of gone through a ton of information and you might be feeling a little overwhelmed, but that's totally okay. That's what we're here for. That's why we put these webinars on, and we are happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.